for a couple of years, nobody cared about WikiLeaks anymore. Nobody was really interested anymore in WikiLeaks and Assange. And the famous Iraq war logs and Afghanistan war logs did not have any significant effect, which I predicted. And then, of course, the partnership years ago between WikiLeaks and the mainstream newspapers like the New York Times and the Guardian and Der Spiegel in Germany, this collaboration led to some really worrying articles at that time, which I dissected and explained how this was really bad because these articles, they excused the neocons and actually made the case for more war against Iran. But Assange was happy. He got his attention and he was the big star. He raked in millions in donation, which he then spent on his superstar lawyers defending him in this rape case. So for a few years, nobody cared about WikiLeaks anymore. And then John Podesta's emails got hacked. And that was easy to do. A lot of people, a lot of different people and groups probably hacked into Podesta's emails because it was that simple. So these leaks could have come from anywhere. And WikiLeaks simply takes that stuff, puts it on his website, and runs with it. So this had a certain effect on the campaign of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. But the difference between the new WikiLeaks, hype and craze, the difference to the last WikiLeaks hype and craze was this time around the mainstream media ignored it. They did not push Assange. They did not push his stuff. You know, years ago, it's starting with that helicopter video, which was deceptively edited. It was a complex situation. It was hard to assign blame to the people involved. And yes, the pilots were in war mode. They were making fun of it. But yeah, the mainstream media made Assange a star, intentionally made Assange a star, a superstar, and then, of course, with the war logs from Iraq and Afghanistan, they made him, they shot him into the stratosphere and got the material early. Big papers, the most mainstream papers you can imagine, you can think of. These papers, they got this leak, this material months earlier before anybody could take a look at it. So they were dominating the reports from the first moment on. So nobody had any chance to really add something meaningful to it and come to different conclusions, you know, and get a lot of attention. So in 2007, 2008, when nobody knew WikiLeaks, when nobody knew Assange, nobody knew who he was, WikiLeaks published a rather worrying leak. It was a database from the United States military. I think it was Iraq. I'll have that link for you later. I think it was from the Iraq War, and it was a list of what the United States forces had in terms of material, in terms of tanks and vehicles and whatnot. So this was important information to the enemy. It did not expose any criminal wrongdoing. Of course, the war itself was criminal, but you know, you have to think about the security of the armed forces, and so this was a very, very strange leak. And of course, the United States government at that point, after that leak that didn't get any attention worldwide, the United States government could have cracked down on WikiLeaks, on Assange, could have stopped him right then and there, and could have busted him, and that would have been it. But that didn't take place. That didn't happen. They left him alone, apparently. And instead, in the following years, you got this growing hype of who is WikiLeaks, who is behind it. You know, before Assange appeared on the world stage, people were asking themselves, you know, who leaked this military database? Who is Assange? Who is WikiLeaks? Who is running this? And there were even military analysis was done to determine how hard it would be to find out who runs WikiLeaks. Well, let me tell you, years and years ago, it would have only taken you a couple of phone calls, even in 2008. Would have taken a couple of phone calls, some Google searches to find out that WikiLeaks had done a presentation in 2007 at a very famous hacker conference in Germany called the Chaos Communication Congress from the group the Triple C, the Chaos Computer Club. Very influential. So Assange and this German guy that did a presentation explained who they were and what they were going to do with WikiLeaks. It was easy to find out who they were, but they were not stopped. Instead, they were turned into superstars. And so, the Iraq logs had no effect. The Afghanistan logs had no real effect. It was just a big hype. And then years and years of nothing. Assange was in the Ecuadorian embassy. Nobody cared about them anymore. And then Podesta's emails got hacked. WikiLeaks published this stuff and, of course, became famous again. And now the Ecuadorian embassy seemingly has... the Ecuadorian embassy not only has cut off Assange's internet access, but they also limit physical access to him. So his WikiLeaks buddies cannot just walk in and take recording devices and record a statement. So naturally, there's been a lot of wild rumors and speculation why we haven't seen Assange in public, why we haven't seen him for weeks. There's been rumors he was killed by a vegan sandwich by Pamela Anderson, or he's been abducted by the U.S. government, and the U.S. government is now running WikiLeaks' Twitter account and whatnot. But today, November 26th, we're supposed to see a public appearance, and whether he makes an appearance or not, it is way more likely that Ecuador simply had enough. That it's too expensive for them to have him at the embassy, because America and America's partners, they can wield all sorts of power and pressure on Ecuador, and this gets just too much and too expensive, and Ecuador wants to get rid of him. That's why they cut his internet access, that's why they cut physical access, so Assange is likely going pretty crazy in there. And he is more inclined to leave. You know, Ecuador doesn't want to look like evil people, and they don't want to toss him out. They want him to go. So they want to increase the pressure so he goes. So he probably just he's banned from communication, and of course the embassy is in control. And recently we had Swedish investigators. They traveled to the embassy to listen to some questioning of Assange with the rape case. And most of these possible charges, I mean, he hasn't been formally charged, it's all a bit complicated, but most of this stuff, most of the accusations against him have expired. You know, there's a statute of limitation, stuff has expired, there's just one charge left. So one charge that could possibly go to court, maybe in Sweden. And even if Assange left the embassy, even if he leaves the embassy, gets arrested, gets deported to Sweden, gets questioned, he's going to lawyer up and he's going to claim, which he already has claimed, that he can't remember anything. And how can these witnesses, how can these women truly remember exactly what happened so many years ago, and there's no case here and he should be let go. That's probably what's going to happen. You know, he might just walk, and he might just walk. Now, of course, there's this big hysteria that he's going to be snatched and abducted or even killed by the U.S. government, or they're going to drag him to the U.S. and there's going to be this big there's this big, court case against him and all that. So that's the hype, that's the fear, that's what Assange and WikiLeaks have been pushing for all these years. Oh my God, he could be killed, and obviously American officials have called for his death, but that is all just war talk, really. fact of the matter is, the outgoing president, the current White House, and then the next White House and next President Trump, they do not want an assassination of Julian Assange. It's just bad press, and they don't want to drag him to America, put him on trial, and have him acquitted, and have like Dershowitz defend Assange and other prominent people defend Assange, and there's going to be big protests, and Assange gets pardoned, or he just gets away in court because Assange has been careful, and he didn't know who his sources was at the time, and Assange just protected himself, and you can't really nail him. The White House doesn't want that, because that would be like the crowning of Assange. That would just give him the status that he craves. That would give him the knighthood, that he is this figure of light, and he went through all this madness and came out on top. That would just be the icing on the cake of Assange's hero fantasy. Remember, when the big leaks were going down, when this big craze was happening with the Iraq logs and the Afghanistan logs, at the height of the controversy, Assange didn't go to Russia like Snowden. He didn't go to Hong Kong like Snowden did at first. Assange didn't go to any place that could really protect him against America and Western countries. No, Julian Assange went to Great Britain out of his own free will. It was his own choice. And the world at the time, was asking, where is Assange? He is escaping the Americans. He is on the run. He's like Jason Bourne. And no, actually, a newspaper found out he just traveled to the United Kingdom in a regular way. He's always been using his passport to fly. Could have been tracked easily. He went to Great Britain, and his lawyers and his people, they called the authorities to make sure they knew where he was. And that was it. Why did he go to Great Britain? America's first and foremost ally. So now he's afraid, the Sweden might hand him over to the Americans. Why did he go to Great Britain in the first place? This does not make any sense, With most cases, you find stuff that doesn't add up, stuff that is weird, stuff that is wrong. But with Assange, you don't find anything that's right. You almost never find anything that adds up. It's one of the weirdest cases, and most people do not really understand WikiLeaks and do not understand Assange. I have spent considerable time analyzing this and what's behind this, so you will get a way clearer picture here than you will find anywhere else. So, this time around, mainstream media didn't turn him into a star like they did in 2011 and 12 and so on, with the Iraq logs and Afghanistan logs. This time, Western mainstream media didn't roll out the red carpet. They didn't make him a star. They ignored the Podesta leaks on WikiLeaks. There was barely any reporting. But instead, the alternative media took this material on the alt-right media, whatever you want to call it, and it's just words, right? The alternative media grabbed this material, this Podesta stuff, and did some good things with it. And there was also a lot of clickbait junk and exaggerated stories and flimsy stories that were presented as sensations. There was a lot of fake news based on this Podesta stuff, right? For example, all this hype about the pedophile ring, and there's going to be arrests soon, and there's going to be indictment soon, and this is all going to happen. It was just clickbait, just to get you to click on it and get some douchebag on a sofa some more advertising revenue. So you didn't get the sensation, you didn't really get the sensation. It was a private email account, and he was forwarding something to his brother. John Podesta forwarded something to his brother. His brother, he donated to this female artist. He donated to this female artist and her spirit cooking dinner. which was not supposed to be like the crazy stuff she did in the past, you know, painting with body fluids. It was just her in a dinner, a thank you dinner for the donors of her Kickstarter campaign. And her work is in the New York Museum of Modern Art. And yes, she's an esoteric. Yes, she's a follower of Aleister Crowley, but so were the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, right? And, oh, by the way, 90%, or let's say large portion of the alternative conspiracy scene, the alternative conspiracy circles, a large portion of them are occultists and esoterics, right? So there wasn't any proof for a satanic conspiracy here. There might be a satanic conspiracy here, but we're not going to get to the bottom of it with clickbait junk stories based on mostly meaningless emails. And then there's this, what was this talk about the pedophile code words and the code talk when in these Podesta mails they talk about pizza and pasta and all that stuff. So somebody on the web just made up this meme, created this meme. Pizza means this, pasta means that, and it's all just pedophile code. No proof was offered that this was the actual translated code speech, and who knows what these people are really talking about. They might be using their own code speech. So we don't know what it really means. It probably means something bad, and I wouldn't put anything past these people. But we need solid proof. We need professional media. We need some real pros dealing with these cases. You can't just plaster it on the internet when it's not ready. When a story is not ready. You just can't plaster it all over social media and a bunch of clickbait fake stories. Because there's not solid proof. You can't prove anything. You know, it just gets debunked and ridiculed, and that was it. And the real culprits, they're getting a warning because of all the attention. You know, they get a warning and they move elsewhere and they destroy evidence. You know, in the old Omaha, Nebraska pedophile case, which got into the political scene of the Republicans. In the Omaha, Nebraska case, you had credible witnesses, you know, really capable investigators, real journalists. You had people dying in weird plane crashes. You had something, right? But with this stuff, with this Podesta email account, you had a bit of innuendo and a bit of this and a bit of that, and none of it was really sensational. Of course, he's not gonna talk about the most sensitive stuff in his private email account. So the mainstream media this time around ignored WikiLeaks, ignored the stuff, and instead the alternative media took the stuff and they ran wild with it and they did a bunch of dumb stuff with it. Got a lot of attention, but now Facebook and Google and all these other big companies, they're now actively fighting fake news, and they've said, "Oh, this has gone too far. We're going to censor everything." And now these clickbait guys and all these fakers, they're self-censoring themselves. You know, they don't want to talk about Pizzagate now, this Pizzagate thing and other things, because that gets them kicked off Facebook, and that gets them kicked off Google and Google revenue advertising and YouTube. And if you're not on YouTube and Facebook, you're dead. So funny to see all the alternative media, or most of the alternative media, is totally dependent on Facebook. They have made themselves dependent on Facebook. The audience has made them dependent on Facebook and Google and YouTube. And the junk was more successful than the real news and then the truth. And people don't want to hear the truth, even though they call themselves the truth movement and all they want is the truth, but they don't want the truth. They want to hear what they want to hear. They want lies that please them and make them feel good. So not only did we not get anything, you know, significant out of the Podesta emails, now we get all this censorship from Facebook and Google, and, you know, the alternative bloggers, they have tipped their hand and they've shown their hand too early, and they've messed it all up. And so what's going to happen when there's a real scandal, when there's real good stuff in the future? Most of these alternative guys, they will not touch that because they fear being kicked off Google and Facebook and all this. So this time around, the WikiLeaks sensation really, you know, the WikiLeaks hype was mostly hot air, you know, just this mostly hot air. yes, it probably tipped the scale towards Trump, and maybe that got Trump elected, but it's complicated to measure, really. And now Trump is filling his administration with bad people, and of course, Trump is being called to pardon Julian Assange and Snowden, but I don't really think that's going to happen. And so, what did we really get out of it? Didn't really get anything great out of it, and it's going to be harder in the future to actually do some really quality reporting. So, Ecuador is probably now going to kick out Julian Assange, or they're going to cut off his internet, or keep cutting off his internet, and they cut off physical access to him, so he leaves, probably goes to Sweden, and takes on this rape case, and then he's a free man. And for America, it's much more lucrative, and for America, it's much more effective to kill the image of Assange, right? To expose who he really is, to show the world how he's a narcissistic person that mostly cares about attention, and he doesn't really care so much whom he hurts in the process. So it's much more effective for America to destroy his image, to destroy the fantasy, and to let him slide back into obscurity. And of course, there's not going to be a new election, a significant election, presidential election for the next 4 years. So people are probably going to forget again about Julian Assange, and people will never find out what craziness is actually lurking behind the facade of WikiLeaks and this whole fiasco. So, I'm just getting this in. I'm just getting a notification here that, yes, Julian Assange is speaking in public again after weeks of disappearance. A conference, so he's apparently he is connecting via Skype or something, connecting to a conference in Beirut. And this conference is co-featured by the Ebert Stiftung, the Ebert Foundation, which is really kind of establishment. And so, you can see his video, you can see him, it's just audio, so of course speculations will go on. Speculation will go on. And here's the real deal. Here's the real deal about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, right? Recently, they celebrated themselves 10 years and 10 million documents, and they're the greatest, and they're so cool. And the press and politicians speaking about WikiLeaks, they usually fell into one of two categories: fawning adoration, fawning admiration, and a political view that's more akin to an eighth grader. And that was one side, and the other side was this ultra hard, Assange should be killed, and that sort of thing, and he should be hunted down. So most people fell into one of these two categories, right? You were either adoring Assange, or you were just there was just pure hatred. So you had to choose between these two extremes. But you had to do a really deep analysis to actually get an objective picture of this. And most of what has been talked about in Assange's past is meaningless. A lot of it has been focused on his former life and what has he done in his childhood and in his teens and in his 20s, and what led him on the way to become the greatest whistleblower of all time, and that sort of crap. That made for a lot of popular articles in newspapers and on the web, but it really missed the point. Most important stuff was ignored, wasn't followed up on. So as a young hacker, Assange collaborated with two other guys called themselves the International Subversives, and they did a lot of serious hacking in the early days of the internet. And that hacking was so severe, the punishment would have been 10 years in prison. At some point, Assange was caught, his friends or colleagues, hacker colleagues were caught, and everybody turned on each other. Everybody turned on each other. And everybody talked. And so it was 10 years of prison looming. 10 years in prison. And so that was the arrest, 1991. And the police in Australia, they had a lot of effort tracking them down because all of this was new and all of this was difficult and it was hard to catch Assange and the others. It was a very long, drawn-out, and expensive investigation. So in 91, they could finally arrest Assange and the others. At first, Assange tried to deny everything and he was lying, and he ended up in a psychiatric institution. So he was on a psychiatric care. And the government, it took them 3 years of more work to get everything in line, to get the indictment, and it was 31 separate charges. 31 separate charges. And they had his former colleagues who were testifying against him. So he was screwed. He was looking at 10 years in prison. But then in 1996, finally the verdict happened. Guilty of 25 of 31 charges. But all of these three hackers who hacked into NASA and the ARPANET of the US government, these three hackers, they only get the mildest possible punishment. They had to pay 2,100 Australian dollars. That was their fine. And that was it. So, how can that be explained? You know, the big mainstream journalists, they were just trying to explain this away by saying, well, the government was incompetent and they didn't really know and all of this nonsense. And we don't really know, but actually we can do some very, very informed speculation. So think of this, right? Imagine you were the Australian authorities and you spent years and millions of dollars to tracking these three guys down. You finally track them down. It's a bunch of kids, it's a bunch of young adults. And sure, you can bust them and put them in prison for 10 years or longer. But then what? You know, there's going to be a new generation of hackers, you know, that all of these guys, you know, there were going to be more of these, you know, there were going to be more young hackers like Assange, and they're going to do the same thing over and over again. So the Australian government would have to start investigating all over again and spend all this money and time again to catch the next Julian Assange and the next international subversive hackers. So it made absolute sense. For the Australian authorities to recruit these three young people as informants, to recruit them as, call them snitches, call them informants, call them spies, whatever. That's the only thing that made sense, and it's the only thing that would explain the mild verdict. As a matter of fact, you can still find a censored version of the court transcripts, and Assange's lawyer even tried to get Assange completely off the hook with a fine. So instead of being convicted and paying the fine, he wanted to get him off the hook, no conviction, and then pay a fine. But the judge wouldn't accept that. So he had to pay 2,100 Australian dollars instead of going to jail for 10 years. So the Australian authorities knew, in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, you're going to have 100 Assanges out there, or 500 new Assanges out there. You need spies, you need informants in that hacker scene, in those hacker circles. And Assange's court files are still mostly unaccessible. This is a secret. You can't take a look at all of it. So we can't really check out the details. And then you had an article in the Australian mainstream paper, The Age. And in this article, you can find out that Assange was cooperating, working with the police in Australia, in Victoria to be precise. He was a technical assistant to catch child pornographers. He was helping the police with technical assistance. So Judge Jeanette Morrish released part of the transcripts of Assange's court case from 1996. And earlier, prior to that, this file was completely secret to protect Assange's safety. Assange's lawyer, Grace Morgan, said Assange helped the police, and Assange was assisting with 2 investigations. He supplied technical help and assistance to catch people that were accused of spreading child pornography online. And Mr. Assange's help ended in the mid-90s, and he doesn't know where the case ultimately went, what happened to the case, and Mr. Assange was just happy to help. And the judge was worried, well, this might look bad, people could think Assange was an informant, and that would be dangerous for him. People might speculate that he got off the hook with his hacking case. He got off the hook because he became an informant and worked with the police. But he supposedly just worked with the police to catch child pornographers, and Assange supposedly did not help to catch other hackers, right? So here I can show you the story here. This is the story from The Age, the newspaper. Assange helped our police catch child pornographers. This was a story from 2011 by Steve Butcher. So here you can check out more stuff. And now I think even Cryptome you can find on cryptome.org part of the transcripts, part of the censored court transcripts. And it's very revealing. It's very, very interesting. So that's admitted. That is admitted right now. He was working with the police, and then he got a very lenient sentence. And we're supposed to believe he cooperated with police to catch child pornographers. He was helping to catch people that nobody has any sympathies for. But it would have made much more sense, to use Assange as an informant in the hacking scene. Because Assange knew how the hacking scene worked, he knew how these guys operated, he was in the perfect position to help police catch the new guys, the new breed of hackers. So, was this stuff about, catching child pornographers, was this just a cover story, maybe? And this is speculation on my part, but it should be investigated further. Was it just a cover story? Was he really actually chasing other hackers? Should ask yourself that. And then, well, how did he spend his life? How did he make his money? What jobs did he have? How did he earn the money to travel all around the world and to live. Where did he get his money from? You know, in all these books about him, there's just very little information. You know, they just gloss over years and years of fog and nothing and seeming nothingness. And the books and the newspapers, they didn't care what he did. You know, he was just gone for years until he resurfaced in 2007 and started WikiLeaks. So, one of the things he supposedly did was he became an administrator at suburbia.net, one of the largest free, well, not free as in you don't have to pay, but one of the biggest independent internet providers in Australia. And this was coincidentally the provider that many hackers were using at the time, or sympathizers of the hacking scene were using. And he was involved in mailing lists like the famous international cypherpunks and so on. And from this circle of hackers, out of this circle of hackers came people who now work for the US government, like Peter Zatko, and they give technical assistance to the Pentagon. And from these people, we see a lot of the tools that people nowadays use to protect their data. This is all very questionable. And then he was a nomad, apparently. He traveled the world, and where did he get his money from? And then you saw stuff getting posted. Once he became famous, you saw stuff getting posted that people found on the web, traces of his life. Found on the web, and you can find this stuff on places like Cryptome. Something like this. It was an email from 1994 between Julian Assange and Fred Blonder. Fred Blonder won a NASA award. So here you have the email from Julian Assange, prof@suburbia.org.au. So he was using that internet service provider, where he would have been, if he was a snitch, if he was an informant, he would have been in a perfect position to inform. And he writes to Fred Blonder at fred@nasa.gov, and he includes a bunch of other people as recipients. So he says, Julian Assange says, it's just technical talk. He's giving his technical opinion, what you should do, what works and what doesn't work. So he gives technical assistance to a guy at NASA, a place Assange had hacked in the past with his buddies. So, and a copy of that mail was sent to Michael C. Newman, a computer expert at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, a leading institution of the military-industrial complex. And at the time, Fred Blonder worked on a cybersecurity program called NASA Automated Systems Incident Response Capability. So Assange was giving, according to these emails, needs further investigation. Assange apparently was giving technical assistance to people who work at those places he hacked in the early 90s. The places he hacked into. So, this is weird. And then in Forbes magazine, Assange was asked about Peter Zatko. Peter Zatko was a hacker, same generation as Assange, and Zatko now works for DARPA, the technical department of the Pentagon. And Zatko works on projects to prevent leaks, to prevent data theft, like Cyber Insider Threat, Cinder. Expert in cyber warfare. He worked for BBN Technologies, a subsidiary of Raytheon. He worked on this to protect the data of the Department of Defense. So Peter Zatko is working to defend against data being stolen, while Assange went on to become the king of stolen data. Apparently. So, and in that story, in that interview in Forbes magazine, Assange said, "Yeah, I knew Peter, and yeah, he does his own thing now, and he's not really commenting further on this." Then Peter Zatko, gave some more interesting information. You have that here at the website Pando. Here's the link: how the US government inadvertently created WikiLeaks. So, this is a story by Peter Zatko. Now works for the government to protect data. And Peter Zatko says, Julian once told me that his college work, Julian Assange told me that his college work was financed with money of the US government, money from the NSA and DARPA. And this money was supposed to be used for, research into security. And one of the only real achievements in Assange's, or publicly known achievements in Assange's career, was a program called Rubber Hose, where you hide stuff on your computer, on your hard drive, and then you have, like you create this secret container, and then you have a fake secret container with the different passwords. So if somebody tortures you to reveal your password, you can just give the fake password, so the bad guys find the wrong container with the wrong information, and you're off the hook, right? But I think nobody has ever seen this Rubber Hose program, and apparently a lot of stuff that Assange worked on was classified. So nobody is allowed to talk about it. So, and Peter Zatko remembers, or claims to remember, a talk with Assange at a hacker conference in 2009. That was the infamous German Chaos Computer Congress conference. And he said the following. Let me just get you the original quote and not go off of my own translation into German. In case you haven't noticed. In case you haven't noticed, I'm not a native American, I'm native German. So here it is. Here is the story from Peter Zatko at Pando. Last I heard, Julian had left to study mathematics and physics at the University of Melbourne. He was working on a duress-based crypto file system, also known as the Rubber Hose file system. Julian told me his graduate work had been funded by a US government grant, specifically NSA and DARPA money, which was supposed to be used for fundamental security research. It was a time when the Bush administration and Department of Defense were seen to be classifying a great deal of fundamental research and pulling back on university funds. These universities were getting the message that they could no longer work on the research they had been conducting, and what they had already done was classified. In a Joseph Heller-like twist, they weren't even allowed to know what it was they had already discovered. So Assange lost his funding. And of course, Julian Assange has told a lot of tall stories over time, and people close to him, they tell you that Assange, gives you a lot of tall stories, and that what he says doesn't necessarily have to be true. But we still find these emails on the web linking Assange to technical assistants to NASA and DARPA or the Los Alamos laboratory. So there's enough smoke to warrant further investigation, but nobody seems to be interested to really find out what happened there. and a lot of famous hackers, a lot of big hackers, became informants, and that's publicly known. And they became, they started to work for the U.S. government. So, for example, hacker Kevin Mitnick, he refused cooperation and he spent 5 years in jail. Adrian Lamo, the hacker Adrian Lamo, who betrayed the WikiLeaks source Bradley Manning to the government. Manning, he just got 6 months of house arrest, 2 years of probation, $65,000 in fines. And so Adrian Lamo got off easy for his hacking stuff. Adrian Lamo reported on Bradley Manning, who confided in him because he thought could trust him. Adrian Lamo reported him, and he got off easy. And he later reportedly worked for Project Vigilant, a private front company of the military-industrial complex, and he was supposed to be a technical advisor and hunter of terrorists, right? The hacker Eric Gordon Corley, his pseudonym is Emmanuel Goldstein. He's running the hacker publication 2600, and he said in July 2010 at the Hope Conference in front of 3,000 hackers, he said that up to 25% of serious hackers, up to 25%, are informants for the government, and you can't do anything about it, and you have to live with the situation. 3 of the speakers at the conference, Kevin Mitnick, Bernie X, and Fiber Optic, they were sentenced to jail in the past based on information provided by informants. And all 3 of them were offered deals. If you spy for us, you get off easy, and they refused. So then, WikiLeaks begins, and they leak the military database of what the United States Army had in Iraq in 2007. It was a very weird leak, and the military tried to find out how complicated would it be to find out who was running WikiLeaks. But it only took a few phone calls. Just had to ask around in the hacker circles, because WikiLeaks in 2007 was given a public presentation of what they're going to do. So why didn't the government crack down on WikiLeaks at that time, after leaking this sensitive database? So, I've read all the literature on Assange, literature by some of his closest aides, former closest partners, like the German Daniel Berg. You never ever get solid evidence that Assange has any special abilities. It's a lot of talk, but nothing really solid. It wasn't Assange who programmed the secure mailbox. It wasn't Assange who did all this. It was a different person who was just called the architect and who later left. So they started WikiLeaks with an old server, and they didn't really know what they were doing, and they had no idea how to really fact check the material that was sent in. So Assange has no skills to organize stuff. He has no leadership quality. He's just very narcissistic. He uses people, and when they start to criticize him or when they don't follow his every mood and lead, he starts to get very cold and very strange, and he shuts them out. And that sort of thing. And this is what his former best friends said about him. People who attacked him later, who didn't attack him later, people who were close to him. And they all really describe the same thing. So many different people on different continents, friends and foes, many people describe exactly the same thing, a very, very narcissistic personality. So, then you had a snitch. You had a serious spy within WikiLeaks. People didn't really notice the story and barely got any attention, but it's very important. So, at some point, in the inner circle of WikiLeaks, you had this young man, Sigurdur Thordarson. So from September 2010, he was very close to Assange, very important guy in WikiLeaks. And people warned Assange about this young man. They warned him, he's not right, he's weird, we can't trust him. Even Assange himself said, well, you can't really trust this guy, but still, they gave him control, they gave him access to information and data. And then came out this young guy, this 18-year-old, he became a spy for the American authorities. He just walked into the US Embassy in Reykjavik and offered himself to the American authorities. So, he provided a lot of emails and copies of hard drives and so the FBI debriefed him for hours and hours and days, and he got all this stuff. Just very, very dangerous and very strange. And he got $5,000. The FBI gave him $5,000 for his treason. So, then you had internal WikiLeaks talk that was leaked, so WikiLeaks can't keep a secret, really. Internal talk that got leaked, you can find it on Cryptome and other places. So these WikiLeaks guys, they're bragging to each other, you know, we got them, we stole so much materials and you know, or we got so much material and we're gonna fleece the CIA or the CIA front groups like all these organizations such as what was it? Let me give you this exact quote. Freedom House, you know, or whatever. Yeah. They were bragging to each other. We get pullbacks from NED, National Endowment of Democracy, CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, Freedom House, and other CIA tits. It's just a very weird email and you know, just bragging how much material they had. So there was some speculation that someone used the Tor network, the anonymizing network, to steal a lot of data, you know, to steal and copy what other people were sending back and forth. And that material became the basis of WikiLeaks. So they had immediately millions of documents and that was not whistleblowing stuff, you know, that was just stolen material. And what did they mean in that eternal email? We're going to fleece the CIA when it suits us. You know, did they sell stuff to the CIA? Did they share some of that bounty, that loot with the CIA and others? So then came the big leaks, the helicopter video, and the media made WikiLeaks superstars, made Assange superstars. And I've already mentioned this. The media now says, and the history books now say, according to the WikiLeaks material, which is total awesome, great material, only 100,000 people died in the Iraq War. Because the WikiLeaks documents say so. Because those documents come directly from the US government. And oh, by the way, that was the reporting at the time. Oh, by the way, most of these losses, most of these dead people, most of them were killed by other Iraqis. So, and you know, the US government just kind of stumbled into this war and yada, yada, yada. And Assange was happy with this reporting. He didn't object. He only objected when he personally was criticized. When the media said, well, Assange was, you know, not really taking responsibility for the damage that could have been caused and that sort of stuff. When they started to criticize him, he was going nuts and he never worked with them again. So what really was leaked was a bunch of censored, sanitized internal US military databases. It was interesting enough to take a look at it, but it didn't give you a clear picture of the war, and there was so many things missing from there, and it was just confusing. And it was so much material, and if you're a whistleblower, you can only leak stuff, select stuff that really shows a crime. You cannot just leak millions of pages or 100,000s of pages. That's not whistleblowing. It's the same problem with the Snowden, fiasco. So then, just to cut this a bit short, this video has gotten longer than I intended to make it, but here's the thing about the rape case, right? Julian Assange, according to his friends and buddies, Julian Assange was using the publicity to get women into bed. That was his right, nobody forces him to get married, right? He was free to do that, but his friends were criticizing him and said, well, he's acting like the Rolling Stones, it's out of control. And of course, that wasn't very safe to do. Of course, you want to be careful in a position like this. You have to be careful. A lot of people are counting on you. You've become this leader. You have to be careful not to get into trouble and get compromised, right? But Assange didn't care. It's just all about his attention and the amount of women he could get. And so in Sweden, these two women go to the police and they say, well, this happened to us with Assange, and we don't even know if that constitutes a crime, but we think it does. It was horrible. And that's how this ball got rolling. That's how the ball got rolling. So people said one of the two women was CIA, when in fact she just visited a university where one of her professors had some connection to the CIA, which is not surprising because the intelligence agencies are present at most universities, any meaningful university. So it doesn't mean that woman who accused Assange doesn't mean she's CIA. There's no proof of that. Nothing. Zip. Nada. Nothing. And so, so this happened. Assange then leaves Sweden. Doesn't want to deal with it. He leaves Sweden. Goes to Great Britain. Why would he go to Great Britain at the height of the controversy with the leaks, when the Americans were supposedly chasing him and he was supposedly on the run like Jason Bourne? He goes to Great Britain, the foremost ally of the United States. Why? So then he's in Great Britain. He immediately tells the police where he is and how they can contact him. So then he pays these most expensive lawyers, probably paid them with money he got in donations. He got from donations. So people donated to WikiLeaks for, getting the truth out. And instead he used a lot of money to pay the most expensive lawyers for his rape case. And instead of, stepping down from his position as leader of WikiLeaks and waiting till this, dealing with this case and getting off the hook and then going back, no, he just made this into this big conspiracy theory about this was a honeypot from the CIA and this is just a ploy to get him. But then when he was in Britain and he used his lawyers actually admitted a lot of dirty stuff. So here's the story from The Guardian, incidentally. The Guardian, who was working with Assange in the past. Here, Julian Assange extradition appeal hearing, Tuesday, July 12th, 2011. Full coverage. And here you can get all the different quotes. So, Assange's own lawyers, Julian Assange's own lawyers admitted a lot of dirty stuff here. They describe it as follows. Assange was getting it on with the woman, and it was getting too much for her. Assange was treating her roughly, and he was impatient. And they were in bed. So all of this is from Assange's lawyers, right? The woman was lying on her back. Assange was on top of her, and he was doing his thing, and he didn't have a condom. And then she tried to physically push him away to stop to stop the sexual act without a condom. She tried to reach a condom, but Assange stopped her. Assange grabbed her arms, pushed her legs open, and tried to penetrate her without a condom. The woman said she was in tears, she couldn't reach a condom, and she was afraid this could end badly. She could catch a disease. This is from Assange's own lawyer. So, the lawyer at the time was Emerson. The lawyer said, well, the woman was struggling for a while. She was trying to protect herself. And at some point, you know, his client Assange, he used a condom and put the condom on. But the woman said he just broke the condom intentionally with his fingernails. So, this is all admitted by Assange's lawyer, but they say, well, still you can't prove any criminal action. And then the second woman, Assange's own lawyer explains the following. Assange's own lawyer explains the following. Both were sleeping, and then she wakes up, and he was penetrating her. He was penetrating her, and he was doing this in her sleep. And she said, I hope you're wearing something, meaning a condom. And Assange replied, yeah, well, I'm wearing you. And she said, you better not have HIV. And he said, of course not. According to the Swedish prosecutors, penetrating a person that is asleep or otherwise not awake, penetrating them without consent is a crime. So it's a bit complicated in the legal sense, right? This woman might have given prior consent to a prior sex act while they both were awake, but then she falls asleep and he wants to have another round. He wants to have another go, and he does it while she sleeps. So legally, it's complicated. Assange might totally get off the hook, but man, his own lawyers admit what he has done, how he treated these women. So please stop trashing these two women out there, yeah? And please not make this into an ideological debate about, you know, feminism and exaggerated feminism. So, Assange's lawyer admitted that Assange's behavior was rude and disturbing and so on, but it was not a criminal act. It's not a criminal act. So then he goes to Great Britain. The British paper Independent had the scoop. WikiLeaks chief, what will he do next? Julian Assange lies low in UK while enemies call for his blood. So the world was thinking he was on the run like Jason Bourne, but hey, no, the paper reported he was traveling to Britain, America's foremost ally. So, German politicians and law experts, libertarian actually, commented on this. Commented on this and said, well, you can't really grab Assange because, you know, it's international law and it's really complicated and so on. But, yeah, Assange then tried to defend himself with the most expensive lawyers against the rape cases. Then, when that didn't work, he fled into the Ecuadorian embassy, waited for years until most of these possible charges expired, and now the saga might continue. And I suggest everyone out there, inform yourself what a narcissistic personality is, and then you make up your own mind and you judge Julian Assange and his actions, and you read deeper into it, and then you may learn something for future cases or your own life, you know, your own surroundings, and you be more careful. You be more careful with people like this and sensations like this. This was an overview. This was an hour-long overview of WikiLeaks. You know, there's things go so much deeper, and it warrants more investigation. You know, we might actually be able to bust Assange and really get down to the bottom of it. But of course, in a matter of few weeks, the interest in WikiLeaks will die down, and nobody will care about this anymore. And then we will probably never figure out the truth, who Assange really is and who he really worked for and who he really works for now. Of course, he's in bed with the Russians to a degree, but then he might be a spy for Western intelligence. He might be a spy for the military-industrial complex. You know, there's no clear-cut evidence yet to come to either of these conclusions to say he's a Russian spy or a Western spy. But on the other hand, there is absolutely no good reason to just trust Julian Assange and to take all of that hype at face value and to just repeat the general sentiment about WikiLeaks. Well, thank you for the attention. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe.